Hello everybody. In this video lecture, we will continue covering cellular respiration. So there is another video that I recorded previously, and that video was about the first step of the cellular respiration, that is glycolysis. So here we will talk about the second and third steps of cellular respiration, citric acid cycle, and electron transport chain or oxidative phosphorylation. So this is a PowerPoint that I will use. Let's go ahead and begin. So overview of cellular respiration, very quick overview. So glucose gonna be oxidized in the presence of oxygen into carbon dioxide and water. And the end product, so the reason for cellular respiration is to make ATPs. Right, so, and you can see here, glucose is 6 carbon molecule. It's split into 2-3 carbon molecules that is called a pyruvate or pyruvic acid, and this happens through a process called glycolysis. No oxygen is needed, and this process takes place inside cytoplasm. Then pyruvate converted into another chemical, 2 carbon molecule called AcetylCoA, so it's combined with an enzyme making this AcetylCoA. AcetylCoA goes through the series of chemical reaction. So finally, all the chemical bonds between carbon atoms are broken, right? So we have carbon dioxide. This happens through the Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle. Also, a little bit of ATP is made. And then last step, a electron transport chain that gives the most amount of ATP, right? So that's cellular respiration, glycolysis, acetyl-CoA formation, citric acid cycle or Krebs cycle, and ETC, electron transport chain. This is also overview, but now it shows you mitochondrion. That's an organelle inside eukaryotic cells. And the first step, glycolysis, happens outside of mitochondria, in the cytoplasm. Glucose is converted into 2 pyruvic acids or 2 pyruvates. 2 ATP molecules are synthesized by direct synthesis, right? So here's we have first step. And then pyruvic acid, if oxygen is present, it will move inside mitochondria, convert it into acetyl-CoA. Pyruvic acid has 3 carbons. Acetyl-CoA has 2 carbons. So 1 carbon atom is removed together with oxygen in the form of carbon dioxide. Now, acetyl-CoA now goes through step of chemical reaction called citric acid cycle, and 4 carbon dioxide molecules are made, right? 2 ATP molecule. So this is carbon and oxygen. What happened with hydrogen? And hydrogen, again, it has proton and electron. So all these electrons are actually attached to special molecules called NAD and FAD, and they became NADH and FADH2, right? So we split glucose molecule, and glucose molecule has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Now, carbon and oxygen are leaving a cell in the form of carbon dioxide. So 2 over here, 4 over here, so total 6. So we get rid of all these 6 carbons with the hydrogen. Well, the hydrogen attaches to a special molecule called NAD and FAD, and those carrier, we call them electron acceptors or electron carrier. They're gonna bring those electrons and hydrogen to a last step of cellular respiration called electron transport chain. And this is where most ATP will be produced. And here where we need oxygen. So oxygen actually needed at the very last step or stage of cellular respiration. So you see oxygen gonna pick up those electrons and hydrogens and turn into water. So oxygen accept electrons, hydrogen became water, right? And of course, this NADH became NAD plus first, and FADH2 became FAD2 plus 2. So back to their original state. So in eukaryotic cells, the pyruvate molecule produced at the end of glycolysis are transported into mitochondria, which are sites of cellular respiration. So, so here's our cell. Glucose enters cell inside the cytoplasm through glycolysis. It's broken into two pyruvates. Now, here's we have pyruvate. And also when we break this glucose, we make NADH molecules here, NADH and ATP. Now what's gonna happen with this pyruvate? If oxygen is not available, it will go through process of fermentation, lactate, lactic acid will be produced, right? Then it will be kind of removed from a cell, and then it can be used again in a glycolysis later when oxygen became available. But if oxygen is present, then this pyruvate transported into mitochondria, right? And if oxygen is available, aerobic respiration will go forward, right? Because we still have lots of energy in this pyruvate. We need to make more ATPs. So mitochondria are made of two membranes. Here's outer membrane, here's inner membrane, and between them are intermembranous space. Very important. So it's right here, right? So those are called cristae. Fluid inside is a matrix, but that space will be important in electron transport chain. The outer membranes cover the organelle and contains it like a skin. So that's outer membrane. The inner membrane folds over many times and creates a layered structure called cristae. The fluid contained in the mitochondria is called matrix. Now, in mitochondria, pyruvate will be transformed into a 2-carbon acetyl group by removing a molecule of carbon dioxide. So here's the pyruvate. So you see it has 1, 2, 3 carbons. It also has oxygen and hydrogen. So oxygen is available. This pyruvate is moved through the special transport protein inside mitochondria. Now this 3-carbon molecule now will be transformed into 2-carbon group. Right, so we kind of removing this carbon dioxide, carbon to oxygen, carbon dioxide is removed. Now, so we end up with this acetyl group, 1 carbon and another carbon. Now, this acetyl group will be picked up by a carrier compound called coenzyme CoA, which is made from vitamin B5. And then the compound will be formed called AcetylCoA. All right, so this is kind of intermediate step of the cellular respiration. Now, I want you to look over here and notice that we also have hydrogen here. So when we split this chemical bond, because we do need to break it, right? So this carbon dioxide is removed, right? And it exits the cells, goes, out of a cell. But when we do it, hydrogen is also knocked off this molecule. Now this hydrogen will be picked up by this NAD, NAD+. Not only hydrogen, but also electrons. So electrons will be picked up by NAD, hydrogen will be picked up by NAD, and some hydrogen will be in the form of hydrogen ions. Right, so that's our acetyl-CoA formation. Now, acetyl-CoA enters Krebs cycle. So here's pyruvic acid, acetyl-CoA, and finally this is the Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle is complex set of chemical reactions involving different enzymes. We are not going into details. We're just gonna look at the basic outcome. So citric acid cycle or Krebs cycle is 8th step of the cycle that is a series of chemical reactions that produce 2 carbon molecules. So one ATP molecule, here's one ATP molecule, NADH and FADH2, 3 NADH and 1 FADH2. Right, so that's what is made through this citric acid cycle. Like the conversion of pyruvate to AcetylCoA, the citric acid cycle in eukaryotic cells take place in the matrix of the mitochondria. So we're making very little ATP, but remember this is for one pyruvic acid, but one glucose molecule yields 2 pyruvic acids. So from one glucose molecule, we will have 2 ATPs. That's still very small amount. Most ATPs, however, generated during aerobic catabolism of glucose, however, is not generated directly from the citric acid cycle. Electron transport releases the energy the cell need to make the most of their ATP. And the molecules of the electron transport chain are built into inner membrane of mitochondria. So I will go back and I'll show you mitochondria again. So you see those folds, this cristae, right? So this is phospholipid bilayer. And so this is inner membrane and this is outer membrane, right? So here's inner membrane, outer membrane, and between them there is a space. Now what you're shown over here, this is the cristae, this is inner membrane, and here's the outer membrane, and that's the space between them, intermembranous space. Now in this inner membrane, in the cristae, this is this phospholipid bilayer and here phospholipid bilayer, but lots of proteins are embedded over here. And this is what electron transport chain is. Those are proteins built inside the inner membrane of mitochondria. So, and this is the matrix. So citric acid cycle happens in the matrix. Now in the citric acid cycle, what is made is, well, carbon dioxide, obviously carbon dioxide just leaves the cell. But here's our NADH and FADH as well, NAD and FAD over here. So those molecules gonna bring hydrogen and electrons to those proteins. And they're gonna drop these electrons. So those proteins are actually electron acceptors. So they're gonna accept electrons. So they drop electron to this protein. Now electron moves to another protein, to another protein, to another protein. Every time when electron is donated and accepted, donated, accepted, every time an electron moves from one protein to another protein, some energy is released and this pump hydrogen in this intermembranous space. So electrons are jumping from protein to protein and hydrogens are pumped through this protein to this intermembranous space. Now we have high concentration of hydrogen over here, and this hydrogen cannot move out because it has a charge. So it needs a special channels. It just kind of like lots of hydrogen accumulating in this area. And the only way for them to go back inside the matrix through the special protein called ATP synthase. And this is like turbine. So when hydrogen now moves from high concentration to low concentration, it rotates this turbine. And every time this turbine rotates, it attaches phosphate group to ADP. And ADP became ATP. Now, this is called phosphorylation because phosphate is attached to ADP. And it's called oxidative because it requires oxygen, right? So hydrogen moving down. It's like, you know, like in a water turbine. When water moves, it rotates turbine and produce electricity. Here, hydrogen moves down, rotates this stuff, and it attaches phosphate group to ADP. Now, hydrogen now moved in, right? And oxygen over here also kind of like jumping, moving over here. So oxygen, this hydrogen, both oxygen, oh, I'm sorry, I'm saying oxygen, electron. This is electron transfer chain. So electrons jumping from one protein to another protein. Now we have electrons here, back here, hydrogen back here. What are we gonna do with those electron and hydrogen? They will be combined with oxygen, making water. So that's where oxygen is needed. So oxygen can pick up hydrogen ions that are really not that good for a cell. When hydrogen ion concentration goes up, this fluid became very acidic, so it can destroy the cell. So cell found this perfect solution, attaching this hydrogen, right, that coming back through ATP synthase and electrons to oxygen, making water, right? So this is we recharging these batteries. When cells use ATP, they use this energy, ATP became ADP and phosphate. Now we're recharging it back using cellular respiration. And most ATP is done through oxidative phosphorylation. Okay, so here's now everything that I told you only in writing. So let's go ahead and read it. All of the NADH and FADH2 reach the ETC, electron transport chain, and dump hydrogens they are carrying. When this happens, the electrons in the bonds move down through the protein channel. So electrons start jumping through from one protein to another. The moving electrons cause hydrogens to be pumped through the membrane against the gradient. As the hydrogens move back through the membrane, 32 ADPs per original glucose form. The moving electrons and free hydrogens end up bonding with oxygen that you breathe in to form water. The ATPs can now do cellular work. So here's another picture of electron transport chain. So here's NAD and FAD over here bringing hydrogen and electrons. So they're gonna dump their electrons. Electrons moving from one electron acceptor to another, right? So from one protein to another protein. When this happens, hydrogen are pumped in this intermembranous space. Now look, we have lots of hydrogen here. It goes through ATP synthase, rotates this turbine, and every time it happens, phosphate is attached to ADP, making ATP. Now we returning hydrogen back. Well, now we have lots of hydrogen here. That's not good. Electrons are coming back as well. Both of them attach themselves to oxygen, react with oxygen, making water. Cellular respiration can generate up to 32 molecules of ATP per molecule of glucose. So here's back to this picture. We have complete summary. We start with the glucose. We end up with carbon dioxide. Where is that? It doesn't shown over here because it's leaving the cell, and ATP and water. Right? Glycolysis, AcetylCoA, citric acid cycle, electron transport chain. This is called catabolism of glucose because every time you break larger molecule into smaller, this is catabolism. The catabolism of glucose provides energy to living cells. But living things consume more than just glucose for food. You don't just use glucose. You use all your food that has proteins and of course carbs and lipids, right? So how does turkey sandwich, which contains protein, provide energy for your cells? All the catabolic pathways for carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids eventually connect into glycolysis and citric acid cycle pathway. So all these nutrients, when you digest them into the, all this food that you digest into nutrients, nutrients enter your cell, and all of them can be used for energy production. Your body preferred carbs as an energy source. The second molecule they will use will be lipids, and then proteins if they need to. So in addition to glucose, cellular respiration can burn diverse type of carbohydrates, fats, and protein. So here's your food made of polysaccharides, fats, and proteins. And here's our cellular respiration. So all of these nutrients can enter this metabolic pathway at different stages, right? So polysaccharides broken into sugar, start with the glycolysis. Fats can enter at AcetylCoA or at the glycolysis step, right? Proteins can also enter this cellular respiration and glycolysis, AcetylCoA, citric acid cycle, right? So all this food can be used to make ATP. And most ATP is made from this electron transport or oxidative phosphorylation. Okay, so this was the last slide. So in this lecture, video lecture, we covered citric acid cycle and oxidative phosphorylation or electron transport chain. Make sure you watch the first part that covers glycolysis. So thank you, and I hope it was helpful.